You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 514, our Ready for Ahsoka series of episodes, where tonight we're going to look at Sabine Wren, who doesn't have the quite extensive history that, say, somebody like Kanan or Hera has, but maybe arguably has had more significant, I would call them experiences, crafts, a lot of things that have impacted and influenced the Star Wars world for better or for worse. And we're going to get into a lot of that tonight. So by no means a character that is not without depth, I should say. So with me tonight, speaking of a lot of depth, I'm joined as usual by Jonesy. Jonesy shaking his head. How are you doing, man? How's it going?
I'm doing well, man. When you were doing the kind of the intro, I was looking at your headliner, WMD Princess.
Yeah.
That caught me off guard. That made me laugh.
Yeah. We'll get into that here in a little bit as far as what that means if you're not aware. I think if you're listening to this show or watching this episode, you probably are aware, but, more on that. So, hey, before we get started, I know you got a couple shout outs and we got an Apple Podcast review. So, and it's been a while. So thank you.
Yeah, pretty crazy. We have a new Patreon member, Brady. Thank you. Welcome to it used to be called the After Dark tier. It is no longer the After Dark tier. It is now, we are the Republic tier. So thank you for, joining the community. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
And a huge thanks to all of our current Patreon members, now part of the tribe members in particular, Rob, Mike, Lauren, Dante, Risk, Justin, Jackson, Truckman, Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh, Jacob, Steve, Reader Reborn, and then our esteemed Delusions of Grandeur members, Rod, CJ, and Alex. Thank you all so much. If you're curious about Patreon, cantinacast.com/Patreon. We have a lot of great content out there. We will not have Patreon tonight just because of some scheduling things going on, but we will try to pick that up here in the coming future. And like you said, we had an amazing 5-star review from Lego Cat 3000, who is one of our regular participants here on the live stream. And so Lego Cat 3000 said, "This podcast is my favorite podcast of all time.
Wow.
Love all the thought-provoking Star Wars talk." So we certainly appreciate that. And that's quite humbling to hear. So thank you very much for the review. We really appreciate it. If you're curious, you can leave us a review anywhere you'd like. We try to gather them where we can find them. It's not always easy to grab all of them from all the different services, but if you put them out there, we will try to find them and we'll read them on air. So thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody who's joined on the live stream tonight to talk about Sabine Wren. I think Jonesy's already got a list going, but if you're interested, head to cantinacast.com/YouTube and make sure you subscribe and like. That way you guys will catch the episodes. Generally, we release these on Thursday and Sunday nights. I'm going to take a little spill here and go on vacation, but have no fear. Jonesy and Lauren have a packed full schedule ready for you guys. I don't want to overhype this too much, but
so we're gonna tackle some.
All right, he's going to temper expectations now that I've hyped it up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we'll keep the way station going, and then we've also talked about doing some Ahsoka tangentially connected material, some short stories that again are kind of connected to Ahsoka in some way, and just kind of fun. You guys did some great short stories while I was out last time, so we thought maybe we'd come back and revisit those. So if you're a Patreon member, be on the lookout for those. The schedule might be a little bit wonky, trying to adjust schedules there too, but we'll make it all work. So if you're, again, go look at the Patreon app, cantinacast.com/Patreon if you're curious about any of that type of content. A little Ahsoka, a little Bear Safi maybe. So we'll kind of see what comes about here. So a lot of fun stuff going on. So huge thanks to Lauren for helping step in while you're out there celebrating life.
Yes, and speaking of Lauren, and a celebration of life too. She's got the latest, I think it's Rise of the Red Blade review, full review, 40 minutes plus, and that's out on YouTube right now. So if you head out to cantinacast.com/YouTube, look for her series of Jedi Novel Archive shows. She does a great job with those, and that one has gotten a lot of traction, a lot of great feedback, so definitely worth it. And if you walk away from that video and not want to read the book, shame on you. Like, she does such a good job of plugging it for no other reason than she really loved it. Like, I knew she was chomping at the bit to speak about this book. So
I've been working through the audiobook and I really do enjoy it as well. It's really well written. So I really like it.
Yeah. Yeah. All
I
right.
really like the people in our live chat too. Alexandra, Scott, Jack, Skywalker's Academy on Dale, and Rob so far. We see some folks out in the background. Please do come say hi over on the YouTube's cantinacast.com/YouTube.
Yep. And I will periodically try to get to some of the comments as we make our way through the show tonight. So if I don't call you, it's no offense. We're just trying to keep things moving right along here. All right. Enough of the formalities. Let's get into the main topic, which is Sabine Wren. So I kicked off the show by saying, like, look, she doesn't have an extensive background, years and years of, experience or experiences as some of the other characters. However, she has some pretty notable things that have happened in Star Wars that have had some like residual impacts and some pretty big outcomes over the years too. So by no means is she kind of I don't want to say a lesser character. I don't think anybody thinks that at all. I want to start by saying kind of what we did with Hera, right? She wears a lot of proverbial hats. When I was just writing down some of the roles, some of the things that she's been involved in, I mean, first and foremost, a Mandalorian. And we're going to get into these specifically here in just a second, but a Mandalorian, she was an Imperial cadet, a bounty hunter for a short stint of time there. Then she became a rebel fighter. She's one of the only few lightsaber wielders, non-force user, maybe force sensitive, but more on that later.
Wow. Way to cover all the bases.
Yeah, right. To be adept at wielding a lightsaber, right? So that's kind of a very unique position. There aren't a whole lot of folks out there. I mean, sure, anybody can pick it up, Han Solo, but can you wield that thing with prowess? That's a whole different story. And then the one thing that I think gets overlooked a lot, which was part of her charm, part of her character that really came out in Rebels in a lot of different ways. You saw it, I mean, throughout, scattered, spotted throughout all of the episodes, was her artistry and to what great lengths she will go to spray paint people like Brooke, of all things, right? I mean, nothing was off limits in terms of what she was willing to leave her mark on as well. But did I miss anything there? I mean, that's a lot. It seems like a pretty broad spectrum of, again, proverbial hats that she wore, roles that she's been in for a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, and really, like you said, she's been present in 77 episodes of material. And I mean, you could argue there's some comic book things and like that, but as far as on screen, what most people have seen, what they know about the characters really just crammed into 4 seasons of Rebels, and there's no extra stuff. So it's really a pretty concise body of work to be able to understand the character. And it's actually really cool where they took that character throughout Rebels, throughout 4 seasons, and really gave her a lot of depth and made her a character that was, a journey, kind of like Ezra, right? Just a different perspective of Ezra, of a somewhat immature, a lot of spirit and a lot of shame and baggage though to go with it, and be able to reconcile all of that and bring it to to her type of future, and be able to, make something of herself and accept who she is, and welcome back her family, as well as understand what it means to have lost, but also to be able to channel that into something productive. I mean, it's just a really fantastic story for Sabine, and really kind of a dark horse favorite, I think, for a lot of Rebels fans. You talk about the characters that get a lot of the attention from it, but Sabine was just very dynamic, and like you said, she's just very colorful as well, and just a lot of fun, right? I mean, who else would have spray painted a TIE fighter, right? I mean, and
right.
just, and then the luck of it all, of having to fly it into an Imperial base,
Right, and the reaction that it got once it came into the base itself too.
Exactly. I mean, the audacity, right? But again, just made it fun, and I love the dynamic with her and Ezra, and we'll see maybe where that relationship goes, or friendship, whatever you want to call it. But we'll explore that a little bit later on tonight as well.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll kind of talk about each one of those here, and then we'll kind of leave the second half of the show to kind of talk about the Ahsoka series, speculate on that, maybe toss around some ideas of where that could be going for her as a character, how she fits into the larger overall narrative of what we think Ahsoka is right now. It's still unclear, but we're reckless that way. So we'll get into that here in just a bit. But let's start with the Mandalorian. So, I mean, first and foremost, of course, she's a Mandalorian, born of Clan Wren, which is very interesting, given those were the Maul's group, right? So, her mother was prominently featured. I guess I would say prominently featured, but she was featured in a few episodes of Star Wars Rebels, Ursa. Then we got to meet her father finally, I think, in season 4, officially, Ulrich, who was the artist. And then she has
a very different dynamic from what you expect a Mandalorian father to be, right?
Well, I want to talk about that too. And then we've got Tristan, which is her brother, and again, he was in a few episodes, and very interesting history there. But let's talk about her family quickly. So you already kind of broke the ice on the father. That's not the father. Like, of all Mandalorian type personalities, I mean, I get it. There's obviously somebody who's doing sculptures and painting and all that, but it was so shocking when we were introduced to her father and to know that he had an eye and was a professor of sorts when it came to artistry, and not just like, you and me going, oh, that's cool. I mean, this guy was like the real deal. He was talking about depth and, historic tones and historic uses and, influences in her work and being able to spot all that. But yeah, just a very different kind of a character for Ulrich that I had never anticipated for Sabine, but I think it makes sense. How did you, I guess, what are your thoughts on her dad? And then we'll move over to Ursa, her mom.
It was very disorienting, actually, too, because you kind of thought that her dad would be someone like a Fen Rao type of character, right? Or maybe even a Gar Sax. I mean, someone like that, right? A very traditional Mandalorian, because that's really all the other Mandalorians we'd ever seen were very much in that vein. And so to have a very different dynamic was very off-putting. But I think also it was a very different dynamic. It's almost like a Bail Organa type of character for Sabine Wren, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and visually, I think too, they probably had a lot of cues, from Bail Organa as kind of a template there. But you're right. This kind of historian of art, but also a critic as well. And it's a good dynamic for him and Sabine's relationship to have something besides war and honor and what it means to be a Mandalorian, but also what it means to be an artist, what it means to be, something more than a warrior, but also be able to integrate that into work and have that, even have his perspective, the dynamic of how that fits in with the Mandalorian culture and with Ursa, with his wife, and just how all that marries together and that balance that it brings too. It was actually kind of interesting and cool, but very off-putting at first of like, what in the world is this? Yeah. This cannot be your dad. Where's his armor? And his armor is the paintbrush, basically.
Right. Yeah, and it's similar. Like a lot of, again, shocker, spoiler alert, a lot of Star Wars is influenced by Japanese culture. And if you think back to like the samurai warriors, which I would equate to, most people equate those to the Jedi, but there are a lot of similarities between the Mandalorians and they're just the art of fighting, the art of war that are similar to, the Shogun eras and the samurai. And one of the things that was always, I guess I wouldn't say pushed, but was encouraged was kind of that balance, right? Being the warrior types, and then on the side, they're learning calligraphy and they're doing art and they're doing gardening, these other things, right? To kind of balance you out, make you kind of whole. So I can see where there's some influence coming from that, having her father be part of this like war group, but at the same time having the softer side. The one thing that always stood out to me is like I know I harp on this a lot, but there are so few, in my opinion, there's more now, but for the longest time, there were few father figures, role models in Star Wars that were actually good. You know what I mean? Like everybody had a screwed up, growing up with a kind of a screwed up parent. Or we talk a lot about sins of the father in Star Wars or sins of the parents in Star Wars these days. But, when you look at the relationship between Ulrich and Ursa, it was it was a good relationship. She definitely wore the pants in the family. She was definitely more of a matriarch kind of, setup where she was the more militant one, the more stern one at times, but then she did have her softer moments. I say all that because when you think about Sabine Wren and you think about just how we grow up with, as kids, we always kind of tend to pull the good and the bad from our parents. I can see looking at her parents, they did a really good job of kind of saying, if you look closely, all of the personality traits that we see with Sabine, not all of them, but most of them, we see coming from her parents, which is a really good job. So I do like that they brought in that softer side, the artistic side in her father, because you got to feel like it had to come from somewhere. But I think it definitely gives her more of a balanced kind of a personality.
But I like this also gives her a way to channel her emotions in a very different way than we see other characters, right? Whether it's joy or inspiration or pain and loss or whatever it might be, anger in some ways, retribution and revenge, and channeling it into those ways that don't necessarily have to be turned back into the typical prototypes of destruction and wanting revenge on people, and channeling it into a different way and just making it something unique, right? And what eventually inspires the starbird, right? So what becomes the rebel signal later, insignia later on. And so a lot of that is just stemmed from all of this. I think it's just a very different dynamic to give you a unique take on a character that is able to express themselves in a different way, and to do it visually and so colorfully works really well for a TV show, or especially an animated series like Rebels in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll come back to that here in a little bit too, because I want to talk about. We've talked about most of the talking points there, but I want to kind of end on the mural because I think there's some pretty significant things there that probably go unsaid and worth noting. Just quickly on her brother Tristan, he was forced into the position of being part of the Imperial Super Commandos, right? So this is after Gar Saxon and the Imperials came in. Clan Wren they sided with these guys originally, which is not uncommon. I mean, you figure a lot of folks did, either because it was just, the best way to ensure that your family was going to survive. Maybe some agreed with, the bigger power. They're the big kids on the block now, so they just sided with them. But they definitely had sided with them. And this is really what drove Sabine, drove kind of a wedge to them, because when she broke away, they continued to stay loyal to the Empire. And so she was almost kind of a black sheep of sorts. She was almost, I wouldn't say exiled from the family, but,
she was kind of ostracized in
I guess,
most
that's
ways.
fair. Yeah, in most ways, right? Most traditional ways, she definitely was. She definitely didn't feel welcome there. And we saw that clearly in season 3, or was that season 2, when she went back and was very hesitant. 2. Yeah, very hesitant about going back. And even then, they didn't really give us the full story. That kind of played out over a course of a couple episodes and then the season there. But going back to Tristan, her brother, it seems like they had a pretty good relationship as well. And, they're all still alive, right? So the question I have a little bit later is, could we potentially see any of these folks? I'd love to see them in live action. I'll just kind of jump to it now. But the idea of reintegrating the family, we didn't even get Fen Rao in Mando season 3, which I think was a missed opportunity. Maybe we get him in this series. It feels like they've got to bring him back at some point, but I don't expect to see any of the family members again. But I do feel like they did a pretty good job of Rebels of introducing us to the characters, knowing that there were, everything got reconciled at the very end. There is a very good, loving relationship, and they respect her, and they brought her back in. So it kind of ended on a happy note from where it started with when that season started.
Yeah, it was really tough for Tristan and Sabine to reconnect, because you could tell he wanted to, but there was a lot of pain in that underlying hurt.
Yeah.
Of what Sabine not only left and did the Imperial thing, but then what she ended up creating, and really became a traitor to the Mandalorians, right?
Yeah.
And so, and those things run really deep, but also you feel that connection, you feel that pull with family in a different way. And I know Mandalorians, family can be what you make of it, and bringing people in the clan, and depending on where you fall with, with the way the Mandalorian preaches, the foundlings and all that stuff too. But, you could just feel the pull all the time. You just know that they have this bond, and they want to fall back into step in that relationship. But sometimes that pain and hurt it takes a while to work through it all. And you just have to know if you can trust someone, right? And again, once you have entrenched yourself with the Empire and you've sided with the rebels, the Mandalorians aren't stupid. They know that betraying the Empire is a mistake, because while they have a lot of resources and they're an admirable foe, the Empire feels insurmountable, right? That's the whole idea of the whole series of Rebels, is they just feel insurmountable. And even the Mandalorians think they have it under control, but I think under the surface they know that they don't. But if they just keep going along enough, and Tristan, being the young male of the group, falls into that typical trap of, even though he knows it's not the right thing to do, he's under their wing. It feels like it's the way to take care of his family and to at least keep the Mandalorian culture alive, even though I think they're a little delusional in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. And I don't think none of them were really happy with the fact that they had sided with the Empire. But like you said, a unified Mandalore is definitely a threat to the Empire, but separated and knowing that they're segmented and they've got a lot of feuds between them. Yeah, I can see where some of these guys are probably going to side with the Empire, ride it out to see where that thing goes because they're not whole. They're not going to be able to take on the Empire as a clan. They could take them on as a people, but that's kind of wishful thinking right now.
It was really interesting though, just to see that Sabine was out on the edges of not only her family and Death Watch, if you will, but the Protectors, and really kind of anybody Mandalorian based. Like no one really liked Sabine at all.
Yeah,
for a time there, so she really pissed everybody off.
Well, and nice segue, because I want to talk about her time at the Imperial Academy. And again, she was a cadet for some time. She also she befriended Ketsu, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, in her stint on Bounty Hunter. That's kind of a dark area. We don't really have a lot of details or a lot of context in terms of exactly what went on there. But the big story here is that she did create something called the Arc Pulse Generator, which is the Duchess, right? And we got to see firsthand what that's capable of doing. They pulled a really sneaky thing on us, thinking that they had killed Tristan and Ursa, and then they tried. Oh, we got out of the blast just in time. I was like, no, kind of deflated it for me. But
that one was not one of my favorite. I don't like it. So I don't like being tricked on screen with things like that, and they just come in later. It's just dumb.
They at least
the one, and they don't do it very often, but they did it there, and I was like, come on, that was really not necessary.
Yeah. And they did it at the end too, right? At the end of the episode. So you were left thinking they had died for like a full week, and then they're like, oh, after this commercial break, they're still alive.
Yeah, it was like Poe Dameron in Force Awakens, right? Like, well, we thought we were going to kill him, but then we brought him back because we kind of liked him.
Yeah, we kind of liked him.
He was measuring well with audiences 18 to 24 or something.
Right. So the question I have about this is because I guess from our understanding, at least my headcanon, and maybe it was, and I forget now, even though I just watched this whole thing because we just did a rewatch on it, but I don't remember where. Maybe it's headcanon, but in my head, I feel like she created a lot more than this. Like, I feel like she made other contributions to Imperial tech in some way. I'd love to think that at least. Even, nonetheless, the fact that she created this, I wish they would come back to this because we've never seen a weapon like this. And not only did she create something that was targeting Mandalorian specifically, targeting people, anyone in Beskar, but then the way she kind of turned it around, it was almost kind of like Superman 2. When Superman 2 goes into the chamber and reverses it and everybody else loses their powers, but he keeps his, she did the same thing with the Stormtrooper armor,
Just reverse the polarity. If we just combine the streams.
Yeah. Shoot the controls on the blast door. It works.
Said, don't ever cross the streams.
Well, yeah. But I feel like this is...
I feel even dumb asking this question, but of all the people, you would know the answer. So she didn't intend to build something that would basically fry people in Beskar. What was she trying to create? Did they ever explore that?
No, I think she did. I think she was. I think she intentionally.
I think she said like at some point she's like, as soon as I found out what they were doing, she tried to destroy it. She tried to delete the plans and everything. Like she tried to sabotage it all. Because that's why they were surprised that this actually survived.
Here's where I'll give her a free pass.
Okay.
She was very young, and she's got everybody telling her, "Oh, you're doing a great job. You're amazing. You can do this." And she had a bone to pick with her family, right? And everybody else. I mean, she was kind of a rebellious kind of kid. So maybe it was just ignorance, adolescent ignorance of like, I'm creating something. I don't really even realize. Just how, because that's the way I took it, especially as the episodes went on, as she kind of was talking about it after, she kind of gave us the background with everything. It felt like she was very remorseful to the fact that she even did it. Like she couldn't even understand herself why she would go through with creating such a weapon. Nonetheless, I think where my question stems from is they've got this weapon. She knows how to create it. She potentially could recreate it. She could potentially recreate it to target stormtroopers. Do you think we'd ever see anything like this again? And then my other follow-up question, and this is rhetorical, I don't know if there's really an answer here, is why hasn't the Empire ever taken that? I mean, I know they did make it an effort in the episode when Gar Saxon and that whole thing's going on. They blow it up, and then they say something like the chopper, wipe all the plans, and of course,
for real this time, right?
For real this time, yeah. So I mean, I guess you could say, okay, they have nothing there, but somebody worked on this thing. It's such a powerful weapon, and it feels like it should get some more play, and we may never see it. I think it's beyond the scope of the Ahsoka series, but that thing's lingering out there, and if we ever get back to The Mandalorian Season 4, Season 5, maybe this thing resurfaces or some iteration of it resurfaces.
I think what would have been interesting is if Sabine would have joined forces with Saw Gerrera and her and maybe Ezra as well, if they got more extreme.
Yeah.
Could something like that when she turned on the stormtroopers would have made a lot more sense if that might have been something that she would have explored, and he definitely would have been all about, this is an ultimate weapon for us. They've got this ultimate weapon. We know it's out there. Right. It's not just rumors. It's not just whispers. It's more than that, right?
Yeah.
And again, I mean, you could see that it would fit that mold if they went more the extremist way of things. But of course, thankfully she didn't, because she does have a good head on her shoulders, right? She does have, her new family has that moral center, and they're there to help bring her back in that kind of way. And that's not who she wants to be anymore, because you're right. Because, I mean, she's lived with that shame for so long, and that just eats at you. I mean, it just, there's always a piece of you feel like you can't share with someone because it feels so shameful and just so embarrassing. And it's a piece of you that you have to accept, and when you accept it in yourself, you just know other people won't be able to do it. And so it's just very powerful for a character like that. And so that's why I love some of those episodes. Some of those episodes are my favorite, where she's finally trying to reconcile that and trying to finally be open with her Rebels family, with her Ghost family, and finally that piece of her comes out to where she's finally open and honest with everybody, so she can actually, officially kind of heal from it too, and feel like they still love you, even though you've done some pretty terrible things. They've all done some things that they're not super proud of in some way, right?
Yeah. Dale's in here with the quote. He says, "You named your weapon after my sister." This is Bo-Katan in that season, I think 4 episode. And then her response, I think, speaks to your question. She says, "It was a series of bad decisions, okay?" Like
Right.
She was just on a roll, really screwing things up.
She
royally,
was really
no pun intended.
Pissed at the Mandalorians. She was really unhappy, and that's what you do when you're a teenager with like you said, with a bone to pick. You just feel like, I'm going to do everything to, I'm going to fly off the handle, right, and just
anarchy.
Yeah, you just
middle finger.
You lash out, right?
Yep. So she eventually leaves the Empire and doesn't really have a place to go. And so, what does every Mandalorian do when they've got nowhere to go? They become a bounty hunter.
Right.
And, oddly, or maybe not oddly, but it sounds, at least from what we gather from the episodes of Rebels, that she and Ketsu, her friend there, left. Later on, of course, I think she's working for, was it Black Sun?
Yeah.
She's working for one of the crime syndicates. I think it was Black Sun. And, right. And so they end up running into each other. And, of course, they reconcile things, and then we don't see Ketsu. You almost forget that she joins the rebellion to help. It feels like she's just kind of like, hey, call me if you need me thing. But then she just shows up like finale of season 4, if I'm not mistaken, or a couple episodes right before the finale. Right. And she's like full on, working with everybody else, which is fine. That whole episode, family reunion, it's just, they literally brought every character back that's ever been anybody in that series, which I enjoyed. But yeah, so she was a bounty hunter for some time. Eventually she broke away, decided to put her skills to good use. And this is when she's befriended, of course, by Hera and Kanan. Again, not a whole lot of details when that happened, but, I don't know what else there is to say. Mandalorians make great bounty hunters, and she's probably one of the better ones.
When you don't have a family, you leave, or you're getting kicked out of the Imperial Academy, or you're basically a deserter. What are your other options, right? And you're right. She knows how to fight. She knows how to scrap. She knows how to survive, because that's what Mandalorians do, right? And so I think it makes a lot of sense that that's the natural. I think in Star Wars, that's kind of the natural smuggler, bounty hunter, whatever it is. Usually smuggler, right, is what you have. And when she's with the Ghost Crew, that's kind of what she is, right? She's really a smuggler. They're a little bit of the Robin Hood type of mentality, but really they're kind of smugglers for that kind of money. So it makes sense. That's what you do. You just find a way to make your scratch in the galaxy.
Yeah. So from there, she meets up with the Ghost Crew. Phoenix Squadron's formed, and she's out there doing the goodwill of the people, right, up against the Empire, the same people she was just working for. And this is where I feel like the show obviously does a remarkable job of giving us the dynamic that she has, the relationship she has. But she is a character who has really good relationships with everybody. Chopper's Chopper, so just kind of put that to the side. But she doesn't really fight with Zeb a lot. She gets along with Kanan. They've kind of have their back and forth a few times, especially during the training. But for the most part, she's pretty much well liked, and liked in a lot of different ways when it comes to Ezra. But pretty much has a great relationship. She feels like she really found her place. She really found her family, much like all the other characters of Phoenix Squad as part of the Rebels crew.
And I really like the dynamic between her and Hera in particular, right? Because I think we see this with mothers and daughters and sons and fathers, getting that acceptance where you feel like you are trusted by your parent to make the right decisions, and you're trusted with information. You're led into that inner circle about more adult things, right? It's a big moment for that. And Sabine really struggles with that throughout. What was it? I think that was mostly season 2, right? So when Fulcrum starts coming in, and she needs to know more than what she is, but Hera wants her to just trust her, and Hera's trying to protect her in some ways too. So it's both sides of letting go, but also, biding your time. It will come, right? Just keep doing the right thing, trust where you can. But at the same time, I like that we get that dynamic between her and Hera, because we don't always see in Star Wars, we don't get a lot of that. We don't get a lot of mother-daughter type of relationships over an extended period of time. We have a lot of sons and fathers, but not as much of the other side. So it was really cool to see that dynamic and then see it in comparison with what, and kind of in contrast with what we see from Kanan and Ezra at the same time. And a little bit further along, because clearly Sabine's been, with the crew a lot longer, but which I think also goes to some of Sabine's struggles with some of that too, of like, why I've been here so long, we've been doing this for so long. Why is Ezra getting special treatment now and I'm not, right? And then you get more of the brother-sister rivalry of sorts, right? In the new guy threatening type of atmosphere between the team and the family. But at the end of the day, it's really, her and Hera. And I love those. There's a couple of episodes where they're on a mission together. I think those are really fantastic episodes.
Yeah, that's the, I forget what they both call. One of them is called Out of Darkness. And it's not the Minox. It rhymes with like Trilox or whatever the heck those monsters are that stay in the darkness.
Right.
That Ezra befriends or uses the Force to befriend. That episode is great because Out of the Darkness, I think, is kind of has a double meaning. Yes, they're in the darkness and they come out of it, but it's really about Sabine, and it's really about Sabine feeling like she's coming out of the darkness because she has been left in the dark. To your point earlier, with what was happening with Fulcrum, and that was a very difficult decision. We see in rightfully so for like Hera and Kanan throughout the series, you can see where they take very conscious decisions, very conscious steps to keep the kids safe, hide the truth from them for their own protection or what they think to be their own protection. And it's only through both Ezra and Sabine have moments where they try to push through that. And what ends up happening is you see the parents become like, and I think we talked about this too during the Rebels rewatch, like as a parent, it's one of the most difficult things to do, but it's one of the most fulfilling things to do when you can finally let go, allow those kids to step up, be their own people, and watch them flourish, watch them shine, which they both did in those two series of episodes.
Right, and it's a big trust thing because, let's just face it, Sabine is impulsive, right? Very much like Ezra. And so when in doubt, blow it up is kind of Sabine, we'll paint it up and blow it up, maybe both at the same time if it's Rook. But, she has to know that she's going to respond in the right way and respond in a somewhat predictable way, not taking away your ability to think on your feet and to have that dynamic approach and be able to make something out of nothing. But also it be somewhat predictable that you're going to do the right thing at the end of the day. You're not going to regret it later. And I don't mean it like that Hera would regret Sabine's actions, but that Sabine would regret her own actions, right? And that's part of growing up. That's the difficult part about being a teenager. And Sabine is a teenager for most of the series, I believe. So she's about the same age as Ezra, I think, overall.
I think she's a few years older. Like
I think they kind of confirmed like 2 or 3 years, but they're close enough for our purposes, perhaps. But again, you want to make sure that she is making that she can make those sound judgment decisions. But she has a lot of, she is very impulsive and she is very emotional with some of her decisions, especially when she wants to lash out. And we see that a lot especially with Trial of the Darksaber as well, which of course is one of the best episodes in Rebels altogether.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we see another great example is when Kanan dies. We talked about that recently, where her and Zeb got on a speeder bike and were out to go. They want to go blow stuff up. They weren't even thinking
blood.
about it.
Yeah.
So, points well taken. Very impulsive. Very Mandalorian of her, right? Maybe her mom's side of the family there.
So Mandalorian. Oh yes.
Mom's side of the family creeping in.
Right.
All right, let's talk about her. Let's kind of start moving to, I guess, segue into the Ahsoka series by talking about her lightsaber abilities. Now, we've seen that she's wielding a lightsaber. I'm assuming that's Ezra since it was given to her at the very end.
Right.
But, can she hold her own against Shin Hati? I think she can. Like, if you think about it, she was trained by Kanan Jarrus using the Darksaber. That was in her possession for a pretty lengthy amount of time. On top of that, she was trained the basics, at least, by Ezra. So you could argue he may have shown her things. He was pretty young still, too, training. But, this is in season 3, so he was pretty good at that point. We saw him doing some pretty spectacular things by the time we got to season 3. And now, presumably, she's been trained by Ahsoka Tano. So I see her as a character, and we'll get into I don't want to get into the Force sensitivity, Force user aspect of it, because I want to save that for just a second. But that aside, because she has a Mandalorian background, she's very well trained in weaponry, as a Mandalorian, as an Imperial cadet. She's got a whole wealth of experience here. I just love the fact that she is one of the very unique people in Star Wars who's able to wield that lightsaber. Again, anybody can pick it up. Anybody can pick it up and use it to slice open a tauntaun. The difficulty is, and I think this is still canon, at least it was in Legends, there's no weight on a lightsaber, right? So you're dealing with a hilt, and most of them they were never balanced. So you can't feel where this blade is. And so wielding that thing around definitely at high speeds and doing all that sort of thing, you're running the risk of hurting yourself more than the other person on the other end. And that's why people just never could pick this thing up. Anybody couldn't just pick it up and be very proficient in it. But Sabine is one of those characters. And I love the fact that we're going to get to see more of that in the Ahsoka series. I want your thoughts on that. But here's something interesting, too, I was thinking about when we were putting the show notes together. I can't remember a time in the Rebels series where Ahsoka and Sabine had a scene together or had any dialogue together.
Yeah, there's really not. And I think we mentioned that a couple weeks ago, that there's really nothing for them together. There was a lot of backstory for them to have to
Sure.
Tease this up a little bit, because even in Rebels, it just all of a sudden they were out on a mission together, but they never really did anything together.
And I think that's fascinating, given that, and we'll get more into that here as far as the master and apprentice relationship and just their relationship in general, how that kind of blossomed. But anyways, your thoughts, I guess, on her deftness with using a lightsaber.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't short the what's the word, like the basics. When she was training with Kanan and with Ezra, she was learning the basic forms, right? Because Kanan wanted that, and there are a lot of Jedi Masters who that's the way they do it, right? I think Qui-Gon Jinn was very much the same way. Obi-Wan wanted to progress a lot faster than he was, but Qui-Gon, and I think Dooku did this with Qui-Gon as well, you have to know the basics. If you can do those inside and out without thinking, that's where you grow from, because that's your base, right? That's what you just do. And that was the Jedi way of doing things. Even in Inquisitor, the Rise of the Red Blade book, they talk a lot about that. When you get into a battle, instincts kick in and your training kicks in, and it's almost second nature. You just fall into the moment, right?
It's muscle memory at that point. Yeah,
exactly. And so when you think about that, her Mandalorian training, but also with the Darksaber training, that gives you a really solid base. Now, granted, that was very expedited.
Sure.
But presumably that went over for several days or a week or 2 weeks, right? So is that enough? But if you're doing it minute over minute, you're going to get there pretty quickly. So I think she had a good base at least to start from. And I think if there were anybody, you don't have to necessarily be force sensitive to wield a lightsaber successfully. Now, how well is she going to face against a Shin Hati is really a good question, because we don't know how strong in the force Shin is. Presumably she has a fair amount of force ability, at least what we've seen from the trailer and from the teasers, and that she's able to best Sabine. But Sabine is also very crafty, right? She's a Mandalorian. She's got other things at her disposal.
Yeah.
It's more about the total package of weapons, not just the lightsaber in your hand. Very much like a Jedi with the Force. You just have a different set of tools in your belt and on your wrists and on your knees and on your whatever. So you have a lot of variety and a lot of ways to surprise your opponent. And I think that's what I'm hoping we see from the series, that she's not just relying on the lightsaber, that she still uses all of the tools around her to be able to do it, so she can be competitive. Even if at the end of the day, you're still, I would argue, even a Mandalorian is still at a somewhat of a disadvantage over a Force user, because the Force is really difficult to combat.
Yeah, and we can talk about it. I've got a talking point down here about fighting style. It was a question for later, but let's talk about it now, because I'm with you. Like, as I was thinking about this, like I definitely want to see her using a lightsaber and using it very proficiently, but there's something about her mixing that fighting technique and kind of incorporating her own background of Mandalorian, like you said, using all the gadgetry, right? Almost like Vizsla, the original Vizsla did. I mean, that's got to be fascinating to have seen him as a true Jedi Knight and still have, all the Mando gear as well. I would love to see something like that, and maybe we're going to see some kind of variation there with Sabine. But I would expect her to do that. I think she, for what she lacks in the Force and what she lacks in Jedi training, because it was limited, like you said, I think she figures out how to make up with that with all the stuff that she's, the vambraces or the backpack or the cable, flamethrower, whatever it is. I'd love to see like just the full arsenal and being like switching back and forth, unconsciously with all the different techniques and gadgetry at her disposal. I think that would be really fascinating to see and would blow people's minds because we know so much now about Mandalorians. We know so much about Jedi, and we've got this very unique character who's kind of bringing the best of both worlds here for the first time on screen. So pretty exciting stuff.
Exactly. And she's not getting in her own way, kind of like what Kanan was trying to teach her, right? When she was saying she was blocking the Force, and not to talk about the Force aspect, but it's really you're in your own way and you're limiting yourself. So take the blinders off, take the handcuffs off, and embrace everything about you in that world. But again, what would be interesting to see though is what does training with Ahsoka look like? What type of training are they actually doing? Is it just lightsaber combat? Is it also meditation? Is it something in the vicinity of Force sensitivity? What exactly is it? Because I think that'll also frame up as to where Sabine's at, of whether she is trying to prefer the lightsaber over another weapon or over other abilities that she might have, and she's trying to wield the weapon of the Jedi or wield just Ezra's because there's some emotional connection to it of what the mission that they're on, and she feels that she has to use that because that's Ezra's and that's what their mission is. That's what they're trying to accomplish. That's their end goal, or at least that's her end goal.
Yeah, yeah. The only other thing I had here was just on the artistry. I said I wanted to come back to the mural. I love the artwork of that. It's so iconic now, and it's going to be forever, I think, with this series. It already was for anybody that was a big fan of Rebels. It's still, the artistry is still, for me, it's in the vein of, the Mortis family as well. You kind of think of that mirror, you think of this one here as well. But the one thing that I've always loved about it is she, it's done by Sabine, and she really kind of brought everybody in. And they all, at the best part of their lives, everybody was still together. And there's something beautiful about looking not just at the artistry and the work, the craftsmanship of the work, but just the fact that she took this screenshot, this picture. There you go. It's not only that, but she's incorporated the Loth wolves. She's incorporated the Loth cats, which I think you can see one on Ezra's shoulder. But this is kind of like that last. I always saw it as like the last known family album, family picture, before things went south, because Kanan still he's blind in his eyes there, right? So presumably this is her last, she's thinking about the family as she's doing this, and when we're all happiest, when we were all whole, when were we last all together, and we get this mural. So, and it's definitely on, you can see the pillars in the back there, so that definitely is Lothal as well. In fact, that's probably one of the Jedi temples. We'll just call it that.
You're going to tease that out until we get to it, aren't you?
Yeah, but I love the light, like the rays of light in the background shining through it all. There's just a lot of.
You mean the Mortis inspiration from?
Yeah, the Mortis. Yeah. Right. All right. That's all I had. I just want to say I love it. So now check that box. Okay, let's talk about the Ahsoka series here with the time that we got left. Let's just step away from the story real quick. Let's talk about Natasha Leo Bordizzo. I hope I said that right. I don't think I've ever heard her name.
Yeah, Natasha Liu.
Lou Bordizzo. Okay. Right. She's beautiful. That aside, like I know it sounds creepy, but she's
way to play your man card.
Yeah, I know. But hey, other people do it for like Pedro and Pascal. This is my thing. But that aside, like the casting on this one is something I'm really excited about. Like if you look at her and if you look at some of the old, like I went and looked at some of the other pictures of her doing other roles that she's been in. Like I think they kind of nailed this. I had forgotten that she was in some kind of a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon movie, and I think that's where she kind of cut her teeth because she's trained in Taekwondo, she's got some sword fighting abilities, and so all of that lends itself. But I think she's nailed this character so well. And we don't have a lot to go off of, but from what we've seen, comparing that to where we think Sabine would have gone by the end of season Rebels to where we are now, I think this is going to be one of the better castings for live action that we've had. I'm pretty excited about it.
You're right. There's some publicity photos or her stock photos or whatever that really are eerily close to what Sabine looks like. And again, I've been pretty vocal that trying to cast an animated character is really tough. And usually you just can't get it right. From a verbatim perspective, right? But for Natasha Bordizzo, she's about on the money as you're going to get with a character and with a casting, I think. And I think, again, that she's demonstrating that with the body language in particular.
Yeah.
The voice we've not heard a whole lot from, but definitely some of the things that we're seeing, even some of the facial expressions. I think with the full trailer we got with some of the fighting scenes where she's blowing things up in the ships, I think, again, you're getting that vibe of what Sabine was, and that she really has captured this character, and she understands what the character is and how she should behave, and just how she fits within the narrative and how she fits with this family as well. I think those are the things that we'll want to see more of to make sure that that kind of jives with what we expected from Rebels, of course. But I think she's off to a great start right now. I don't know why anybody would be having any second thoughts about this character, and I'm not seeing any second thoughts out there by this character. If anyone, people are in very much the same opinion of, wow, they really hit money on this one. She looks the part and she's acting the part, so I'll speed ahead on this one.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Like, even in the dark circles that I tip my toe in every once in a while to see what's going on, they all seem to be, on board with her casting. So that's all boding well for the series as a whole, I think. So going back to that question, the one question that and we don't have all the answers. We don't have enough to really kind of answer this truthfully. So this will be mostly speculation. But I mentioned earlier that they never had one scene together. They never really have a whole lot of. They really didn't have any dialogue that I remember from the Rebels series. But it is an interesting concept that I want to kind of pick out why Ahsoka felt compelled to train Sabine, or did Sabine approach Ahsoka and say, I need additional training? I think it's more of, in my opinion, it's probably more of the second. And I say that because if they were at some point going to go back on a mission and go look for Ezra out of the gate, right? Presumably they did this because this is what we were left to believe at the end of the finale in the epilogue for Rebels. They got on a ship together. They went off and explored looking for Ezra. And again, what I'm theorizing, I think we even kind of pulled apart this during the teaser trailer of all things. We could sense there seemed to be some kind of contention between those two. There was some kind of bad blood of some sort. At least there was enough attitude coming off Sabine to think that, okay, this didn't go very well. Why? But my theory is that Ahsoka felt like, hey, we're going to be doing some dangerous stuff here. You've got the lightsaber. Sabine probably wanted to use it in honor of Ezra, of all things, right? I mean, I could see her using that lightsaber and saying, this is for you, buddy, and that's that sort of thing. So, Ahsoka's not going to push back on that. So rather than, die on a hill of saying, no, you can't wield that, I can see where she would give in and say, let me go ahead and train you. I think the downfall may have been the fact that Ahsoka, like Anakin, was just never... I mean, they're great Jedi, but were they the best teachers, right? She never really had any form. Well, that's difficult. I don't want to get into that because now I don't want to get into, was Anakin a good master to Ahsoka? That's a whole nother question.
Right.
Because, right. Well, you get what I'm saying though, right? Like, I don't know. It may have been too much for her to take on. And then I think the other thing that kind of drove the wedge between them, if there is one indeed, was the fact that I think they were on two separate missions. For Ahsoka, it was clearly going after Thrawn, putting an end to the Empire, stopping that little Kindle that was still out there, potentially still out there, whereas Sabine was, commissioned, deputized by Ezra in the series saying, Sabine, I'm counting on you, right? Knowing that of all the people, she's the one person that would never lose, their bearing and would stop at no ends, I think, to go try to find him and bring him back. And I think that's where probably things diverge. That's probably what the wedge was between them. And, we're probably going to get them, we are going to get them back together based on the new trailer. So I guess your thoughts on kind of their relationship is really what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I firmly believe it's the latter. I think it's definitely that they went out there, they were on the same team. They can do both at the same time because those two goals really directly align with one another because we know Ezra and Thrawn are together. So it all works. But over time, clearly their interest in what their focus is and maybe the obsession you have with each one, or whether that's both of them or maybe it was just Ahsoka or whatever it is, clearly starts to drive that wedge, clearly starts to have a bit of a divide between the characters. So I think it makes the most sense. I think narratively it makes the most sense. I think it's also interesting to see what that is because Ahsoka, while she's very focused and very driven, we've not always seen her to be an obsessive character in that kind of way, right? She is very thoughtful, but she can always pull herself back and be back in the moment, kind of like where she was with Ezra in A World Between Worlds. Mm-hmm. Of all people, Sabine is kind of the one who's usually impulsive in that way of getting really short-sighted and really getting narrow focus, right? And so I can see her getting a bit transfixed on Ezra, especially with the responsibility that she might feel she has to go and find him or to not let him down, right?
Right.
And so again, when you have both of those pulls for both, that over time that will pull you apart, especially if you're not making progress. especially if you're not accomplishing the things you thought you would be able to accomplish, and you start to have differing opinions about how to get there. You're getting different intel, and your prioritization of what you're trying to go after feels like it's leaning more one way or the other. And it feels like it probably leaned much heavier into the Ahsoka camp than the Ezra, search for Ezra with Sabine in that regard. So now, why Ahsoka trained her? It's a good question. I like the idea that if we're going to be on this mission and we're going to spend all this time together, we need to train. We need to meditate. We need to also prepare physically for these fights. And if you want to learn the lightsaber, let's continue in your training. And again, the reason why that training stopped was because of this rift or the split or the differences of priorities became too insurmountable for them to continue on that path, to where it became a true dissonance in the relationship, to where they could not continue that in any capacity. So not only did the friendship or the mission end, but the training went right along with it, of course.
Yeah. I could also see a scenario where Ahsoka, she is very focused on the fact of finding finding Thrawn, putting an end to the Empire. But her as a way seeker. I don't know of a good term right now. That seems to be the most appropriate term and the most relevant term that we have these days, rather than gray Jedi or whatever. The fact that she is kind of following the Force. I mean, who's to say that Ahsoka was hell bent on this mission, and then at some point something happened, and she just felt like, okay, the Force is speaking to me, and I know Ezra's out there, and I know he's important, but we haven't found him, we haven't gotten anything. And now I need to go divert my attention somewhere else because that's where the Force is leading me. Her following the Force in that regard, I could see where that could drive a additional wedge. Maybe it's some combination thereof, but I could see where
what if the Force started guiding Sabine in a different way?
That's true.
We saw this with Kanan and Ezra, right? We the competing visions, competing priorities. So and it could repeat itself a little bit here in a different perspective.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Force sensitive topic, and to be clear, right? Force sensitive, and Rebels has a couple lines in there where I think it's Kanan saying that Master Yoda taught him that everybody has the Force in them. And people have blown that into say, oh, anybody can be Force sensitive. Oh, that's not what he's saying. What he was saying is everybody is a part of the Force. There are some people that are Force sensitive, meaning like Chirrut is a good example of somebody who's Force sensitive, right? He feels the Force, he trusts in the Force. Sometimes these miracle things once in a lifetime happen to him, as we saw on Scarif Beach, right? But is he out there wielding the Force? No. Maybe it's guiding him in some ways. But, you get what I'm saying, right? Then there's the Force users, who are the ones that are actually moving rocks.
High midichlorian counts, right.
High midichlorian counts, exactly.
Thank you, George. Thank you for helping us understand this so much better.
I just love the fact that you brought midichlorians back into the conversation, because every time I bring it in,
they're M count. They're M count.
Yeah. But so I guess for Sabine Wren, could she be Force sensitive? I think that's probably fair. I can't see I wouldn't even bat an eye if they somehow said that she was Force sensitive.
Oh, you would, because we'd have to talk about it for 45 minutes.
Well, we may do a whole show on it if that turns out to be the case. But Force user, I think, is a little bit more challenging. I think there's things, unless they've thrown us off intentionally, there are things that have happened in some of the teasers and the trailers that would lead us to believe that she is not a Force user in the true sense of being able to manipulate the Force or guide the Force, however you want to interpret that, to help her with her lightsaber combat or move a boulder or telekinesis or any other these magnificent powers that come along with Jedi. I don't think she needs it. Like, again, I'm totally fine if there's something there, and yet she's strictly relying on her bounty hunter / Mandalorian / training through Kanan, training through Ahsoka. To me, that seems more intriguing. It feels like there's, as much as I love Jedi and as much as I love Force users, as you guys know, right? There's just something special about having Sabine kind of be in that role. But I guess your thoughts on whether or not you think she's Force sensitive. Is she a Force user? Do you care? What would you like to see there?
Well, Sabine has good intuition, I think, right? And good instincts. And I think those are the things that really serve her well. And I don't think she was training to be a Jedi at all. I mean, I just don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To me, that's less interesting, I guess, because this whole era is really muddy with who is a Jedi, who's not, where are the Jedi at, so on and so forth.
Who lived?
Luke Skywalker, who's in the temple, who's training, who's not. It's just kind of a mess, right? It's not a mess. It's just an unknown for a lot of things, right? So I don't really want that to be the case. But again, if she ended up being force sensitive, she feels something, right? She feels some stirring in her in some way that she doesn't understand. That can be compelling. That can be interesting. That can be something to explore, where she maybe starts to think that she has more ability than maybe she does. But it doesn't necessarily hurt her character. It just enhances her instincts to an extent, right?
Yeah, right,
And,
right.
and we talked a little bit about this, I think, in Discord the other day too, where, like, sure, it's a good example, right? Someone who has the force flowing around them. We all have it flowing through us, right? But can he actually manifest it and do things with it intentionally? You know, it doesn't seem that way, but can he influence in a certain way when he truly gives himself over to it in a passive way? Maybe. Yes, like what we saw in Scarif, right? So I think those are things, there's varying degrees of all of this stuff. It's a scale.
Yeah,
It's not a
exactly.
yes or no. It's not binary, right? It's just very much a scale of where are you at in this, and that she would have some ability. I mean, have you seen how many backflips she can do and how acrobatic she is? Now, granted, I see a lot of people who do this with, acrobatic UT. We see the Olympics, right? And these amazing athletes. So we know these things are, possible, with finger quotes here, with, in Star Wars, of course, being a little over the top. But again, she does seem to have other, slightly enhanced abilities, or at least a lot of agility that seem a little unnaturally gifted. But does it have to go any further than that? No, it doesn't have to. And am I okay with it being ambiguous too, and it not really being explored in a lot of detail and remaining a bit of a mystery, or remaining a bit of a question mark? I think that's kind of interesting. I don't need an answer for everything, right? I mean, I think things like that are left better unsaid, to where the character, we just don't know. It's a little open to interpretation, but there's enough there where it doesn't get in the way of where they want the story to go and how they want the characters to grow and develop. And it's a way to help the character mature and bring them to a different place in their life, rather than define who they are and get riddled and downtrodden as a result.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex coming in strong says Finn is a good example of this as well. I would agree.
If Finn's probably a stronger example of someone who clearly appears to be force sensitive, right? Especially by the end of the series,
Yeah.
we see the force sensitivity of knowing where Rey is and things like that. So
He knew where the cannon was, or the weapon was, or whatever on Rise of the Skywalker. So,
right.
yeah. But I mean, you could see where it was kind of developing over time. Definitely force sensitive. Definitely a potential force user. Well, we'll see. I don't know if Sabine's in that court just yet, because they've teased some things that make us think that she could be, but then it may not be that her after all.
Because think where it goes, though, right? The question of where does it go after that? If you have a force user Mandalorian, that opens a whole new can of worms, right? I mean, it really does
reopens the can.
Reopens the can all the way back from the Tar Vizsla days, where it's not really known if there's been another Jedi Mandalorian or strong Force user Mandalorian in some time, right? So
besides Grogu,
but he's still getting. He's not even he's barely a foundling, barely a foundling.
maybe.
So I don't know if he truly counts quite yet, but anyway.
All right, okay, yeah.
But you get my point, though. At least someone who's grown, right? And is that how does that fit with Bo-Katan and company, right? And granted, there's a big question there anyway. But then if you're also a Force user, it just seems to compound all of that. And I think it waters down and confuses the whole Mandalorian story. And so I think it just gets a little chaotic. And I think the stories tend to be rather simple, I think, even in nature, even to this date. These stories are usually pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of crazy directions and depth that they go anymore, at least none that I can really think of off the top of my head when we've had with Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, any of those. They've all kind of gone more or less in a general forward direction, with a couple little surprises here and there, but nothing really earth-shattering like a force-sensitive, wielding Jedi Mandalorian.
Yeah. I hope we get something like that at some point. And it would be cool. I mean, I'd rather see Sabine than Grogu, because I'll be long dead before we see Grogu talking and, an adult wielding a darksaber, or a lightsaber, sorry. Which he has.
It would be cool, though. We're not going to lie. It would be cool seeing, Bo-Katan with the darksaber, and, well, I guess the darksaber's destroyed, but you think it's going to come back. And then Sabine right next to her with the lightsaber. So,
yeah. Dale Skywalker's Academy is asking, will Sabine reforge a darksaber and use it as an adept?
No.
Yes or no? No?
Well, I already made that point, though. I like that it's destroyed. Now we can focus to what the significance of the mythosaur is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I want it back though. Oh, last question.
It's
question.
cool. No doubt about it. It's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So last question is really kind of focused around Ezra, and that relationship started at very one-sided. I mean, poor Ezra is sitting there looking up at her with puppy dog eyes all the time, talking about, oh, you were thinking of me? You were talking, any chance he had in season 1. And much like we talked about with Hera and Kanan's relationship, kind of, I wouldn't say pulling away, but it definitely changed because they were thrust into the rebellion, at the forefront of the rebellion. And that didn't leave a lot of time for a whole lot of, interpersonal relationships outside of the family aspect, right? So we don't see a lot of that happen as much in season 2 and even in season 3. Season 3 is really about them just really working well together,
right.
And then by the time we get to season 4, really not a whole lot there. You feel that she's really come to respect Ezra more than I think she ever thought she would, right? I mean, she actually watched him grow up from a teenage boy into this young man that we see, similar to what we would get from like Anakin Skywalker going from, Clone Wars, Revenge of the Sith. And I guess it kind of really culminates in that final moment where we talked about in that season finale when, they don't say anything, but Ezra looks over to her like, I need to do this. And she goes along with it. It's never talked about, never discussed, but she goes ahead and plays along with it so that Ezra can leave and go do what he needs to do, right? That level of respect, that level of that relationship has been flourished and nurtured so well that it got to that point. And there's a part of me that I love where they are, but it feels like it feels unsettled and unfinished if we didn't revisit the ship part of the relationship. And I would love to see it kind of, not a role reversal, but I would love to see, I've got thoughts on, when we get to the Ezra show, I've got thoughts on where I think Ezra's at. And it's not in a position where I think Sabine's going to show up and they're going to be like, oh, we're back together and everything's happy, hunky-dory. I don't think that's going to be the case at all, personally. But at some point, I would love to see them come around and be kind of a thing. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be at the forefront of the show. It can be very subtle, like similar to what they did with Kanan and Hera, right, where it's there, but it's not kind of the main point. But it's nice that it's there because we'd love to see that stuff as grown men and adults and grown people. But, what do you think? Do you think there's any chance? And if I would say this too, last thing, if it's going to happen, like it feels like that's going to be something that the very end of the season, maybe in an epilogue, maybe in season 2, I just don't think they're going to have enough time to get through all of the stuff that we think they're going to get through in 8 episodes. But
right. And I think when you look at Rebels, I mean, I like how you put it. They do have a very trusting, respect-laden relationship, right? That's they trust each other. I don't want to say it's brother and sister, but it's very much, I mean, they work really well together and they enjoy working together. I think it's one of those things of also they just don't have the time to pause anymore.
Right.
By the time we get to seasons 3 and 4, so many heavy things are going on. There's so much weighing on Ezra, I think in particular, and then with Sabine and her family and what's going on Mandalore, there's just so many heavy things going on in their lives that there's no room for all of that. And this is where Kanan and Hera got into this situation too, right? Of where they, over time, they knew they had something. They were already outwardly affectionate in their own way, right? With, love and dear and, a hand and a look and things like that. So they clearly knew how one another felt, but they never took the time, and things started getting in the way there as well. But here you have 2 characters that had to learn how to get along, and they've just grown up together now too. So it's almost like your high school sweetheart, or the person you went to school with and you grew up with them and you always got along really well, but you never even really considered the relationship after a certain point but when you paused and do, you're like, oh my gosh, wow, they really are, wow, they are a perfect fit for me, or whatever it might be, or you at least open yourself up to the idea. I like the idea of them being in a relationship. Like you said, we want people to kind of tie off and go together and live happily ever after, right? We enjoy that. I'm with you. I think Ezra is going to be in a very different place than maybe where Sabine would be if that's something that she's interested in pursuing. And I think that's a great thing. I think that makes the story interesting in that regard. So I think I would like for them to explore that, though, or at least understand where they at least were and reconcile with where they're at and see if maybe it has a future. And I'm with you. Depending on when Ezra comes in is really dependent on how much you get of all of that. If Ezra doesn't come in until episode 8, then
we're out of time.
Yeah, you get a little flavor of it, maybe a conversation and that's kind of about it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if he comes in at episode 3 or 4 or 5, okay, you've got more time to develop that. Even if it's like at a 6, like you've got a few episodes for those types of things to develop. If they're together on screen, you can take that time to be able to do it. But I just don't see it. I'm kind of guessing Ezra will probably come in very, very late in the season. Unlike Thrawn, like, hey, why is Thrawn here, but Ezra's still gone? Where did Ezra go?
Yeah.
And so I think it'll be a bit of a hunt there of evading and trying to thwart Thrawn while also still trying to find Ezra and Sabine. And again, this is where Sabine and Ahsoka, that rift might come back even if they reconcile.
Yep. Well, I'll end on this. This series, the one thing I'm really excited about to see is the fact that these characters that, as a Star Wars Rebels fanatic, I love them to death, but it's very hard to hold conversations with anybody that doesn't watch Star Wars Rebels about who these people are. Right. And the fact that they're going to be introduced for the first time on live television, Sabine Wren, who is one of the coolest Mandalorians out there, Hera, who's one of the coolest pilots that's ever existed in Star Wars, right? Chopper, who's one of the most, let's see, I would say cantankerously, but, war crime criminals that people have never seen. They're just going to get the limelight that I think they've been so deserving of for so long. And I think people are going to look at Sabine, much like I said with Hera, in a different way at the end of the series. And I think she's going to float to the top. And she's just such a deep character. She's got so much background, and there's a wealth of things that they can pull from. If indeed that's something that they want to do, we got to keep in mind that this is primarily focused on Ezra and it's primarily focused on Thrawn. So, but the fact that
on Ahsoka, her name's kind of in the show title,
right? Well, yeah. So maybe it is.
We seem to lose sight that this is Ahsoka's show.
Well, because I'm coming at this as like season 5 of Rebels. I mean, that's Filoni's talking about it, so he
feels that way, right?
He already pulled that Band-Aid off. I'm just going with it. It's his words, not mine.
But to your point, Alexander in the chat is saying Sabine Wren is one of her favorite Star Wars characters. I mean, so clearly this character has a lot of, like you said, there's a lot to her, even though we don't have it all. But you just know it's there, and she really does connect with people. And again, especially I think we're people who were growing up during the show, or even if they were just a little younger in their adult years, a character like this and Ezra you can really attach to and kind of grow with them, right?
Yep. All right. Well, we're going to end the show there. Do you want to give any special shout outs for the folks that joined us tonight?
Yeah. Again, if you were listening to this podcast, we appreciate the download. If you'd like to come out and join the live stream, we are live on Sundays and Thursdays. And you can join these amazing people in our chat: Alexandra, Sky, Jack, Skywalker's Academy, Rob, Alex, Trent, 80s kid from the 90s. If there was anybody I missed, I really do sincerely apologize. But thank you for all the conversation. We'd like to throw these up on the screen as well. So thank you all for coming out.
Yes, and we'll be back. So again, Jonesy and Lauren are going to pick things up when I come back here in about 10 days or so. We'll continue on with our Ready for Ahsoka series. So I think we've got Ezra still to talk about, and we've got a couple other shows. We've got Thrawn. That's going to be probably a 4-hour show at this point, but we'll try to narrow that down to 2.
We're going to do it without saying the words "heir to the Empire" or referencing the books at all.
I'm going to start. I'm going to start with Heir to the Empire. Hello, and then I'll go into hello everyone. Welcome to the Cantina, guest.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the Heir to the Empire.
Heir to the Empire show. No, they've already debunked that. Either way, we've got a lot of coverage still coming. Mostly it's a Rebels Love Fest, so hopefully you guys can join us for all of those shows coming up. And what else we got?
And certainly if you haven't joined Patreon and you're curious about it, we do have previews of our top 3 moments from Rebels seasons 1 through 4. So there's usually a preview of 5 or 10 minutes. So if you're curious about Patreon, you want to hear what we do, I do try to put the previews out there so you can listen to a few minutes of it, see if it's something you're interested in. And then if you want to join, that starts at the $2 tier. And then if you want to see the video, it just goes up after that. So again, cantinacast.com/Patreon if you're curious about those, especially if you're a huge Rebels fan. We had a lot of great conversations. Lauren joined us for a couple of them. We had Dante and Alex. So you kind of get everybody's perspectives on all of these moments from each of the seasons. And we really, between the 5 of us, we really left no stone unturned for the most part.
Yeah.
Because and you and I are guilty of this mostly because, everyone else is actually, they follow the rules more or less. They come through with an honorable mention of just a handful, right? And they try to be reasonable. And you and I are like, nope, here's everything we liked about it. Here's my Hondo list. Yeah. Here's this and that, right?
Here's my Melch best moments. We need a breakdown on Melch. How about that? Let's try to commit to that.
No, we don't.
Okay, fine. All right.
They can fly. There we summed it up nicely.
Yeah, that's his best.
Melch in a
moment.
box, as Dante
Melch in a
likes to
box.
say. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave it on Melch, and we'll see you guys here in just a few days. So thanks for joining us.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.